Hello everybody, it's Oliver G here. You're listening to the Earful Tower, where I try and figure out Paris with the help of special guests. And yeah, I'm back in Paris for the start of Season 5, back in the studio. And today we've got quite an fun episode, if I do say so myself. I'm going to be tackling the age-old question, left bank or right bank? Essentially, the two sides of Paris, I'm putting them head-to-head in a bit of a showdown. And I've got the help of two authors, left banker John Baxter and right banker Lindsey Tramuta, who are also going to be putting forward their case for their side of the city. Me, I'm going to be sharing with you some data that I've been mining, because I think I've come up with my own answer of which side of the river is specifically and scientifically the best. And I've also been surveying you listeners to hear what you had to say. Now, of course, there's no real answer, is there? I mean, you can't have a better side of the river in Paris. But the idea is that through listening to some of these experts and through hearing some of the sort of statistics that I've put together, you might find a few new and interesting things to see on your next trip to Paris. Or indeed, you might find you have a new favorite side of the river, just like every single Parisian does. Anyway, Season 5 of the Eiffel Tower, let's get underway, and thank you for listening. Okay, so let's get this straight. A lot of people listening, maybe you've never been to Paris, maybe you didn't even know that the city was divided so decisively into two. So let me start at the very beginning, the basic facts, so you know what we're talking about. Otherwise, you won't know what we're going on for the next half an hour. So let me explain. The left bank of Paris is basically everything south of the Seine River, which more or less dissects Paris in half from east to west. And that's incidentally how it got the name left and right bank. If you're standing looking with the flow of the river in front of you, everything to your left-hand side is the left bank and everything to your right-hand side is the right bank. But let's get the facts straight. The left bank itself has 6 arrondissements. Everything, as I said, to the south of the river, very well known for jazz, Latin Quarter, the Eiffel Tower's there, a long string of famous writers, artists, and philosophers. And it's where they say Paris learned to think. The right bank is everything north of the river. It's quite, significantly bigger, 14 arrondissements or districts, and it's probably best known for the Marais and the Montmartre neighborhoods. Now, if you want to ask author John Baxter which is better out of the left bank and the right bank, well, as you're going to hear now, he'll say the answer is self-evident. So this is the following audio that you're going to hear from John Baxter is when I was walking with him through the Jardin du Luxembourg, the Luxembourg Gardens, one of the most beautiful parks on the left bank. So here's audio from our video walk that we did live for Patreon subscribers. More on that later, but here's John Baxter. Why did you say that the left bank is better than the right bank?
It's self-evident, my dear chap. The left bank is the bank of the intellectuals, of the writers, of the artists. The right bank is the bank of the bloated plutocrats, the art museums, the expensive restaurants, the too much traffic, too many traffic policemen. There's no comparison, really.
No comparison, really, he says. Lindsey Tramuta, who spent 12 years on the right bank of Paris. She's lived there for 12 years. I went to her apartment in the 11th arrondissement, and she said there's a little more of a mixed spirit on the right bank.
A lot of that spirit started in the eastern part of Paris, which is in the right bank, but also, in one geographic part of the right bank. So today, a lot of the things that developed, whether it's, independent shops or galleries and some of the, new neo-bistro and more inventive kind of cooking that we saw boom in this part of town is now starting to trickle over across the river to the other side. So, I think there was a birthplace for it, a hub, and now it's spreading. But I wouldn't say that the new Paris, so to speak, was initially everywhere on the right bank. I'd say it was very concentrated in the 11th, 10th arrondissement, 19th, 20th, everywhere that was a former fringe neighborhood.
So you might already be noticing there's definitely two camps when it comes to Paris and the two banks. But I'm not done yet with John and Lindsey. Let's hear a little bit more of John's comparison of the left and right banks. And the right bank, which he calls more of an imperial city.
Well, the left bank has a lot more character. It doesn't have the wide avenues of the right bank. The right bank is kind of an imperial city. It's got it's very formal. It's very very dignified. The left bank, began. This was all church country. Then it was belonged to various aristocrats. So it never had a proper history. It wasn't. It didn't grow up. It was kicked and told to get up, as they say. And so there's a ragamuffin quality about it, a bohemian quality about it. And things here tend to be more distinctive. The handwriting is different, if you like. It really is fundamentally different. There is a right bank, left bank mindset as well, which I have to admit I bought into quite early on. This was the first place I lived on the left bank right for the very first time I came to Paris.
Okay.
I never thought about crossing the river.
So there you see he talks about this concept of the divide, which I've talked about a little bit before, but it is quite interesting. A lot of Parisians, and this has happened on the Eiffel Tower before, people who live on one side talk about rarely venturing to the other side. I used to talk about it myself until I met Baxter and sort of became friends with him and headed down to his neck of the woods more often. But also, Lindsey says the same thing. Listen, here's what she says when I asked her how often she gets down to the left bank.
Not as often as I maybe could, but when I do, I enjoy it because it really does feel like a bit of an adventure. Sometimes it could be a few months before I see the Eiffel Tower again, and so it creates this novelty in me that I like. So it's always good to, go a ways or go a little while without crossing the river and then feel that feeling again as though you're experiencing it for the first time.
So now, for those of you maybe who aren't so familiar with Paris or who live here and haven't really thought about it, now you're getting an idea of this kind of divide. And it was this idea of the divide that got me thinking more about, is there a way of figuring out which one's better? Is there a reason why people tend to prefer one or the other? So I started off easy. I put a question on Facebook and Instagram and Patreon for the supporters of the Eiffel Tower. And I said, which do you prefer? No explanations really, just a straight up poll, left bank or right bank. And each time the left bank won. On every single platform it won, maybe 60% to 40%. And I wondered why people seem to have this fascination with the left bank, especially from a tourist perspective, which is what I assume many of the followers of the Eiffel Tower they're tourists who love coming here for a good time. So I figured I had to start out with this statistical approach to the left bank and the right bank for this definitive answer. I had to figure out by first figuring out the parameters. We're talking about for tourists. We're not talking about the best place to find an apartment or the best place to propose to your girlfriend or your boyfriend. We're talking about, from a tourist perspective, which bank is better. So I figured I had to start by thinking like a tourist, which was quite easy because I basically am. Even after 4 years here, I still walk around with a gobsmacked, wide-eyed wonder at this city of Paris. And I figured, what does a tourist want when they come to Paris? And I narrowed it down to 5 categories. They want good. In fact, they don't want good. They want the best museums, restaurants, cafes, landmarks, and neighborhoods. And that took me a while to think of that list because there are a lot of things that could have been on it. Nightclubs, but then you're ruling out all the kids, obviously. And I thought parks as well, but not everyone likes parks. Things that you need. You need food, you need drink. You need a bit of culture through the museums. You need landmarks, because we're talking about some of the best in the world here, and neighborhoods, because as I've said 100,000 times on this show, the best way to see Paris is to go for a stroll through the neighborhoods. And so what I did is I went on this website, TripAdvisor. I'm sure you all heard of it before. They don't sponsor the show. In fact, their site's not perfect, but it's the best way of getting an overview of all these landmarks, restaurants, all that kind of stuff, rather than just basing it on what I recommend. We've got the reviews of, I don't know, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people. And the way they've done it is you can select, for example, museums on TripAdvisor in Paris and rank them based on the reviews of the people who visited. So stay with me here. What I've done is I got the best museums, restaurants, cafes, landmarks, and neighborhoods, ranked them all from top to bottom. And then I looked at the list and I gave points according to which side of the river each of these places fell. So, for a very tangible example, we'll start with the museums and I'll walk you through. And the point of me walking you through this list, all of which is on the EiffelTower.com, is because I think I'm going to point out some of the kind of outliers or interesting things I noticed in gathering the figures here. I think you'll find there's some interesting things. And for me personally, there's a bunch of new places put on my list of things to visit. So listen to this. There are 255 museums in Paris, and the top museum is the Musée d'Orsay. I'm sure the art museum, I'm sure many of you have been there. It's one of the top things to see in the entire world. But that was the top of the 255 museums, 60,000 positive reviews. So you know you're in for a good thing there. So that's on the left bank. So that gave 10 points to the left bank. So on. So the number 2 museum gets 9 points, and so on all the way down to point 10. But I'll point out a few of the interesting things here from my perspective. Number 2 was the Musée de l'Orangerie. Have you even heard about that one? I'm going to be honest. If you had asked me about this a week ago, I would have scratched my head because I've never been there. I'm sure I've heard about it, and looking at the pictures, I've seen it, but I've never been in it. This is the second top museum in Paris. You'd be forgiven for thinking the Louvre would be up a little bit higher than this, but this is Impressionist painting and post-Impressionist painting, and it looks pretty beautiful. It's in the Tuileries Garden in the right bank. So just looking at this list, like I said, it's all on the website, but you might get some inspiration for your next trip. So Louvre didn't come in till 3rd place. 4th, the Rodin Museum, which I have been to and is fantastic on the left bank. And then the 5th, the Musée Nissim du Camondo, which I'd not even heard about either until some Patreon conversation started about it the other day. The Musée Nissim de Camondo, I'm reading this here, it's an elegant house museum of French decorative arts located in the Hôtel Camondo near Parc Monceau, which is one of the best parks in the whole city. So that's been added to my list. I'd never heard of it before. Anyway, I added it all up. So for the museums, giving a score, 19 points for the left bank, 36 for the right. If you're after museums, head to the right bank. So let's get through this list. Next, Paris neighborhoods. So I've written here, it's crucial. A crucial part of a good trip to Paris is a good walk through a good neighborhood. And this one kind of divided the banks here. The top spot was the Marais, which I think is pretty self-evident, one of the best places in the city for a walk. And incidentally, where I do a lot of walking tours for regular listeners. It's something this whole week, taking a little break from the story. I think every day this week I've met a listener. So a big shout out to all you guys who've got in touch, the ones who've booked a walking tour around the Marais. I hope you enjoyed yourself. Karen, Ken, I'm looking at you guys. And for the rest of you who I met for a coffee or a lunch even, Corinne, Catherine, Preston, thanks for listening to the show. Anyway, the Marais, great neighborhood. The top 3, in fact, were for the right bank. The Montmartre, which is going to be, I think I've said this already, there's a high chance I'm going to be living in Montmartre. So, there's going to be a big leaning on the Earful Tower for Season 5. Montmartre, and then the first arrondissement, right bank. I'll skim through the list here. Ile Saint-Louis, Saint-Germain, left bank. The left bank in general is 6th place according to TripAdvisor, and so on, with a pretty even split. Now, I'll zoom through cafes and restaurants because this, let's be honest, this list is always going to be changing. But it was a pretty even mix for the two. The left bank won on the cafe front. The top cafe, according to TripAdvisor, is called Strada on the right bank. I've never been there before. I've added that to my list as well. Once again, all this is on the EarfulTower.com. And restaurants, I got to be honest, I don't think I've been to almost any of them, and I imagine that list is constantly changing on TripAdvisor, not least because there are 15,000 restaurants in Paris. But for this one, the right bank won it overwhelmingly. 43 out of the 55 points went to the right bank. Now, finally, the one that you maybe have all been waiting for, the landmarks in Paris. According to TripAdvisor, there are 1,500. In fact, there's 1,543 landmarks in Paris. I wonder how many I've seen. I wonder how many you've seen. But here's how the top 10 plays out. If you think the Eiffel Tower is going to be number 1, you are sorely mistaken. It's not till 7th place. So not even earning many points for the left bank there. But number 1 is the Church of Sainte-Chapelle. That surprised me that it was up the top, followed by the Opéra, Notre Dame, and following on down the Louvre, the Marais, the Eiffel Tower, Sacré-Cœur, Arc de Triomphe, Champs-Élysées. And it proved to be a rather embarrassing outing for the left bank with only... so the points, 55 points in each of these things. The left bank only pulled in 5 with 50 for the right bank. The only thing was the Eiffel Tower on the left bank there. So there you go. There's the 5 list, 5 categories. And if through my scoring system, the way that you add it up, there's 275 points to be won. So one bank brought in more points than the other, which officially makes it the better bank for a tourist. And I'm going to tell you that after this short word from our sponsors. Now, who am I kidding? I don't actually have sponsors, but I want to talk to you a little bit just briefly about Patreon, something that I go on about a lot on the show. It's how I make an income from the Earful Tower. You've probably noticed there's not any intrusive ads for things like mattresses, like on many of the other big podcasts out there. This is just Patreon. And a lot of you, I tell you, a lot of people have got in contact with me saying, yeah, I'm going to subscribe one day. And now's the time to do it. With Season 5, there's a lot of extra stuff if you sign up for as little as $1, $1 a month. If you like the show, please consider parting with $1, which works out to be about maybe 25 cents per episode, and that's just for the episodes you're listening to now. The point is, there's a lot of good stuff behind the scenes, a lot of stuff that I put a lot of time into, and if you can part with $5, $10 a month and you think this show is worth it, you're securing the future of the Earful Tower, and that would mean a lot to me. Now, the audio that you heard from John Baxter, for example, that was us walking through for about 40 minutes through the Jardin de Luxembourg. And, that guy does tours for people. I think they cost $200 or $300 euros to walk through that park. You're getting it there for $10 a month. You're hearing a famed author. We had basically paparazzi. There's a whole story in this, by the way. We had people following us around, taking pictures. In fact, I'll tell you now, the guy who was taking pictures of us, I looked him up on Wikipedia afterwards, and he was a famed and extremely famous photographer who used to hang out with the likes of Salvador Dali, Pablo Picasso, Yves Saint Laurent, and Johnny Depp today. And I'm hopefully gonna get him on the show because he came and he spent the whole walk show following us taking pictures, not upon our request, just one of the interesting things that happens behind the Patreon paywall. Anyway. A bit of a rambling ad here, but please consider, if you can afford $5, $10, please consider signing up because it might not make a big difference for you, but it would absolutely make a big difference for me. So, now, you've heard my spiel. I want to get to the best bank of Paris. So, the best bank in Paris out of the left bank and the right bank. Here's the final tally. Out of 275 points, the left bank brought in 84.5 points. And the right bank brought in 190.5. So overwhelmingly, the right bank, according to my highly scientific statistical analysis here, the right bank is about twice as good as the left bank if you take it from the perspective of things to see and do that make up the top lists of TripAdvisor. Of course, it's a subjective topic. You will no doubt have your favorite, and this list is unlikely to have changed your mind about anything. But if you look through the lists on the earfultower.com, you'll get an idea of, sort of an idea of things to see. Like, I'm going to make a beeline for some of those museums that I hadn't heard of, and some of the landmarks that I hadn't been to as well, believe it or not. But I thought it was interesting that, I tried to make it as fair as possible based on the kind of things that tourists want to see. And I was quite surprised that so much stuff is on the right bank compared to the left bank, yet that the left bank is in everyone's hearts, so popular, so famous, the place that everybody wants to be. I don't understand it. I'm just putting the statistics out there for you. But before we get on, I've also asked John Baxter and Lindsey Tramuta about how, if they were to be deported to their respective countries in one day, how they'd spend their last day on their respective bank of the river. So let's start with Lindsey Tramuta.
I would go walk along the Canal Saint-Martin, sit there for a while. I would browse the books at Artezard, which is one of my favorite bookstores. I would go have lunch at Robert, Rue de la Fontaine-au-Roi. I would go and have a coffee at both Café Oberkampf and Café Méricourt. I would go over to Bon Temps Pâtisserie and have some of their sablé. I would head for ice cream at Une Glace à Paris. And I would walk along the banks of the river, still on the right bank, and walk until my feet ache. And just take it all in, because this is a city that is to be taken in. And then I'd probably jump in the river so that I didn't have to leave.
Plenty of familiar recommendations there for anyone who listens to the Earful Tower regularly. So that's Lindsey Tramuta. Be sure to check out her book, The New Paris, and her website, Lost in Cheeseland. And let's turn the microphone over to author John Baxter to hear how he'd spend his last day in the left bank.
What would my ideal day would be? Well, it would be probably will begin with breakfast. I suppose I might stretch a point and have breakfast at Dermagot, even though it's overpriced and a bit snobby. Their breakfasts are superior. Then I would probably go to probably a gallery somewhere and look at something that I might go to the Orsay and look at Courbet's painting The Origin of the World. I'm not going to particularize about the content of the painting, the Origin of the World, but you can find it online.
Just don't Google it in front of everybody else on the bus.
Exactly.
That's all.
Then I might come for a stroll in the Luxembourg. I would probably go up to Montparnasse for lunch. There's a couple of nice little restaurants up there I go to. In the afternoon, well, this was where some young lady of my acquaintance would probably come into it. So the idea of spending a long afternoon in a quiet little hotel with an affectionate and attractive companion would be my only conceivable afternoon. And in the evening, gosh, I don't know. Depending on the seasons, it would be nice either to go to see something at the Opera Garnier, which would be ballet rather than opera.
Hang on, that's on the right bank though.
Yeah, well, so it has to be the left bank.
Yeah.
Okay, what would I see over
You're deported early, John.
yes, exactly. Music over here is not good, actually, unfortunately. I don't know. I'd have to think about it. Probably a big dinner, but I had this big lunch, didn't I?
Yeah.
But then I am tired out from my exertions of the afternoon, so maybe I would go to La Pérouse, hire a private room with somebody equally nice, and have a sort of debauched evening, in one of their locked private rooms.
So there you have it. You heard from everybody what they like, what they prefer. If anyone's wondering, I realize now why there was a 0.5 of a point on the final tally there. It's because there are a few landmarks that, for example, one of the landmarks was the Pont Alexandre III, the bridge that connects the two banks. So I divided the points. And also, to keep things fair, anything that is on the islands between the two banks, the Ile Saint-Louis or the Ile de la Cité, I divided the points there. So the Notre Dame Cathedral, I'm not going to give that to the right bank, even though it administratively is on the right bank. I divided the points there using my own podcaster's discretion. So that's it for this episode of the Earful Tower. I want to put a shout out as well to John Baxter, whose new book that comes out in February, A Year in Paris, will be the book club book, I think, for, if not March, then April. So get your reading eyes around that book. For Earful Tower fans, which I assume you are if you've listened this far through the episode, there is a big surprise about 2/3 of the way through the book, which knocked me off the very chair that I was sitting on while I was reading it. Yes, your host, Oliver G., mentioned in the book with one of my stories. More on that soon. Really cool seeing my name in print in an actual book. So that's something worth keeping an eye out for. A Year in Paris coming out in February. The book club that I'm talking about, that's it's a little thing I started on the side for people who like books about Paris. At the moment, it's free to get in there, although I'm encouraging people to sign up on Patreon to secure the future of it. But there's a good 200 people in there now. Currently, many of us struggling through Suite Française, a book set in occupied Paris and France during World War II. Bit of a heavy end to the episode, so let's bring it up a little bit with a few reviews that have come in. Why do I read these reviews? Well, I think the Earful Tower's created a little bit of a community now, and I love to hear that, I heard the other day, meeting up with Catherine Watt, a regular listener and Patreon supporter, that some of you Patreon supporters have started meeting up when you're in Paris. So I love the idea of creating a community, and I'm open to the idea of doing some kind of regular meetups. So if anyone's got any suggestions or thoughts about that, let me know. But here's some reviews that I quite liked reading. Obviously, they're more about the honeymoon season, which if you're just listening for the first episode, you have missed out on a lot. This is me and Lena, my wife, traveling around the whole country, 4,000 kilometers on a little red scooter. So this review, Oliver and Lena inspire. I've listened to every Earful Tower podcast. Wow, that's impressive. That's like 50. A few people let me know that they've listened to every single episode. I figure that's about 50 hours of listening. So full credit to you guys for getting that far. I and I enjoy it very much. I especially love the honeymoon season. As an Aussie who's visited France on a couple of occasions, I'm inspired by Oliver's brave move to make Paris his home. Oliver's down-to-earth approach to explaining the amazing destination of France fills me with the desire to return. Lena adds a freshness and joyfulness to the podcast she features in, complimenting Oliver beautifully. Looking forward to Season 5 from David, the organic strawberry grower. Thank you so much, David. I assume this is the same David who emailed once about listening while packaging strawberries. Love hearing where you guys listen from. Thanks for the 5-star review. They say it makes a difference. You guys who can't afford or perhaps don't care to sponsor on Patreon, one thing you can do if you do want to help that's totally free is recommend the show to a friend. I literally sit down with your friend. When they say, what have you been up to this weekend? What did you do on Monday? You say, well, do you listen to podcasts? If they say yes, recommend this show and you'll be one of my favorite listeners. Here's one more review. Paris tips were fantastic, says Dali Street Traveller. My husband and I were in Paris for 5 days in July this year. Because we already had the trip planned before he proposed, we called it our pre-honeymoon and began to look for fun, unique things to do. We came across the Earful Tower at that time and did several of the things we heard on the podcast. We went to the recommended Café Miracle and loved it. I love it too. My husband loves cycling, so we also went to the Peloton Cafe, which was fun as well. I love history, and we found parts of the Philippe Auguste Wall. We also found the shop in the Marais district with an old map of the area described in the podcast. That map, that's cool to know that you went there, Dali Street Traveller, because that is a fascinating little shop right near the Peloton Cafe with all these old maps of Paris. Love it. Well done for getting in there. Altogether, a fun and informative podcast. We also really enjoyed your honeymoon season and plan to hit the western side of France next. Wow, that's great. Thanks for the review. Good job on finding the Philippe Auguste Wall. It's not easy to find. All you history fans out there, that's one of the things I recommend, walking along the streets of the Marais looking for that wall, as I featured in one of my episodes before. And to those of you who want to see a bit more of the Marais and perhaps do a private tour when you're in Paris, send me an email and I'll show you exactly where to find the Philippe Auguste Wall, plus all the other secrets of the Marais that you've heard on the Earful Tower. So, once again, it's a new season. I'm looking for your support. Don't hesitate to sign up on Patreon, book a tour, buy a tote bag, or leave a review. Anyway, on with Season 5. Plenty of new guests lined up. And as usual, thank you for listening.